Across the vast landscapes of our planet, scattered from the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of Central America, from the windswept plains of Mesopotamia to the misty mountains of Peru, stand the remains of structures so immense, so precise, and so enduring that they defy the passage of time itself. These are the megastructures of the ancient world temples, pyramids, fortresses, aqueducts, and monuments that speak not only of engineering genius, but also of human ambition, faith, and power. Imagine for a moment the echoing sound of chisels striking stone, the chants of thousands of workers, the sweat and toil under the blazing sun. These were not mere buildings, were testaments of entire civilizations, declarations of dominance, and sacred bridges between humanity and the divine. But how were they built? Who commanded such colossal works? And what do they reveal about the societies that dared to defy nature and gravity in pursuit of greatness? This is the story of ancient megastructures, unraveling lost engineering masterpieces. Episode 1. Chapter 1. Mesopotamia's Ziggurats. Stairways to the gods. Imagine standing on the windswept plains of Mesopotamia more than 4,000 years ago. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers cut across the land like silver serpents, flooding in the spring, leaving behind dark, fertile soil. Around you rises a city, its mud brick walls stretching across the horizon, its markets alive with the scent of grain, beer and wool, its streets echoing with the voices of merchants, priests, and children. And above all else, towering in the heart of the city, stands a colossal structured terrace, rising step by step into the sky. This is the Ziggurat, a staircase for the gods, a mountain built by human hands in a land of flat horizons. The birth of monumentality, the story of the Ziggurat, begins with the rise of the first true cities in human history. Around 4000 BCE, small farming communities in Mesopotamia began to merge into larger settlements. The Fertile Crescent allowed agriculture to flourish, which in turn gave rise to surplus food, trade, writing, and centralized authority. Yet these early people faced challenges: unpredictable floods, harsh summers, and the constant threat of rival city-states. To survive, they turned to their gods. Deities of water, fertility, war, and the sun were believed to control every aspect of life. Thus, religion was not a private matter. It was the very foundation of society. And in these societies, temples were not small shrines, they were the beating heart of the city. Out of this religious devotion and political necessity, the Ziggurat was born. Unlike the smooth-sided pyramids of Egypt, a ziggurat was a stepped tower, usually built of sun-baked mud bricks. At its base, it could stretch hundreds of feet across, and with each ascending level, it grew narrower, creating a tiered, stair-like effect. Atop the ziggurat stood a temple, painted and adorned, reserved for priests and the ruling elite. The people below could see it, admire it, and fear it, but only the chosen few could ascend to the sacred summit. In essence, a ziggurat was both a religious monument and a political statement. It proclaimed to all who looked upon it, this city is favored by the gods, its rulers are the chosen mediators between heaven and earth. The Ziggurat of yore, a case study. Among all ziggurats, none is more famous than the Ziggurat of yore, built around 2100 BCE by King Yarnamu, as ruler of the third dynasty of Ur. Picture it as it once stood, a massive platform of 3 terraces.
Oh, mercy.
Rising nearly 100 feet high, its mud brick core faced with fired bricks inscribed with the king's name.
Okay.
At the top, a dazzling temple dedicated to Nana, the moon god, glittered in the Mesopotamian sun. The ziggurat dominated the city's skyline. Farmers approaching from the fields could see it from miles away. Travelers arriving at ER's gates would immediately understand the city's wealth and power. Archaeologists tell us that its construction required extraordinary resources. Millions of mud bricks had to be molded, dried, and stacked. Reed mats, bitumen, and baked clay were used to reinforce the structure. Workers labored under overseers, and scribes recorded the supplies in cuneiform tablets, the world's first written records. This was not just a building project. It was a demonstration of state organization, a fusion of religious devotion and political propaganda. Religion and symbolism, why build such colossal monuments? The answer lies in Mesopotamian cosmology. Unlike Egypt, where stone pyramids were tombs designed to guarantee eternal life for pharaohs, Mesopotamian ziggurats were not tombs. They were temples of the living gods. The Mesopotamians believed that each city belonged to a specific deity. Ur belonged to Nana, Babylon to Marduk, Uruk to Inanna. The ziggurat was the literal dwelling place of that god on earth, a sacred mountain where heaven and earth touched. Priests would ascend the steps, perform rituals, and offer sacrifices. The common people gathered below would witness the smoke rising into the sky, carrying their prayers upward. This symbolic function cannot be overstated. In a flat land without mountains, the ziggurat was an artificial pika, man-made cosmos, a cosmic ladder. It was a place where humans reached upward and gods descended downward. Society and power's ziggurats were also instruments of power. To command the construction of such a monument required immense authority. Kings used them to legitimize their rule, claiming divine favor. Consider the inscription of King Urnammu, which declares, "For Nana, his beloved lord, Urnammu mighty man, king of Ur, king of Sumer and Akkad, built his temple." The message is clear. The king is not only a political ruler, but a servant of the gods. By building for the divine, he secured loyalty from his subjects and prestige among rival cities. The very act of construction bound the population together. Farmers, craftsmen, and laborers all contributed, uniting under a shared religious and civic purpose. In this way, the ziggurat was both a monument and a tool of social cohesion. Daily life around the ziggurat. To understand the ziggurat fully, we must imagine the city around it. At the foot of the ziggurat lay the temple precinct, filled with workshops, storerooms, and residences for priests. Cuneiform tablets found in your record offerings of grain, wool, and livestock. Temples were not merely religious sites. They were economic hubs, controlling land, trade, and labor. For ordinary citizens, the ziggurat was ever present. It was the backdrop to festivals, markets, and daily prayers. During major ceremonies, processions wound their way through the city, drums and lyres echoing as priests ascended the sacred steps. The ziggurat was not just a building, it was the axis around which the entire city revolved. Archaeological discoveries. When British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated Ur in the 1920s, he uncovered the remains of the ziggurat. Though weathered and reduced by time, its core still stood. Woolley described climbing its steps and gazing across the Mesopotamian plain, imagining the splendor of the ancient city. He also discovered royal tombs nearby, filled with treasures, golden lyres, elaborate jewelry, and evidence of ritual sacrifice. These finds illuminated the wealth and complexity of Sumerian civilization and the central role of religion in daily life. Decline and legacy. Over centuries, many ziggurats crumbled. Mud brick, unlike stone, cannot withstand millennia of rain and wind. By the time of Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, some stood in ruins. Yet the idea of the ziggurat endured. In the biblical tradition, the Tower of Babel is often seen as a memory of a Mesopotamian ziggurat structure, so tall it reached toward heaven, provoking divine intervention. Later, in Islamic architecture, the minaret, the tall tower from which the call to prayer is given, echoes the idea of sacred height. Even in modern skyscrapers, the symbolism of height as power, prestige, and divine connection persists. Conclusion: a ladder to the sky. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia may not shine with the polished limestone of the pyramids, nor attract millions of tourists each year, but they represent something just as profound. They were humanity's first great megastructures, the earliest attempts to build on a monumental scale, uniting religion, politics, and society. They remind us that long before steel and concrete, long before machines and modern tools, humans dreamed of touching the heavens. And with mud, sweat, and vision, they built stairways to the gods. Chapter 2. Egypt's Eternal Pyramids. The Machine of Immortality. A desert of stone and silence. The sun rises over the golden sands of Egypt. The desert air shimmers with heat, and from miles away, 3 colossal shapes dominate the horizon. They are not hills, not natural peaks, but monuments carved from human ambition. These are the pyramids of Giza, the most enduring icons of ancient engineering. For over 4,000 years, they have stood on the west bank of the Nile, guardians of eternity. Long before steel towers pierced the skies of our modern cities, the pyramids were already there, reaching toward the heavens, daring time itself to erase them. The origins of the pyramid, the story of the pyramids, begins not with the grandeur of Giza, but with a more modest innovation, the mastaba. In the early dynasties of Egypt, rulers were buried in flat-roofed rectangular tombs of mud brick and stone, called mastabas. These structures marked the transition from simple burials to monumental tombs. Around 2650 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, a visionary architect named Imhotep transformed the mastaba. Rising nearly 200 feet, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Imhotep's genius was not only architectural, but symbolic. The stepped design evoked a staircase to the heavens, a ladder by which the king could ascend to join the gods. The Pyramid Age, the Old Kingdom, the true Pyramid Age, began during Egypt's 4th dynasty, around 2600 to 2500 BCE. Pharaoh Snefru, known as the Pyramid Builder, experimented with designs. Its bent pyramid, which changes angle halfway up, reveals the trial and error of engineering on a colossal scale. But Snefru's later achievement, the Red Pyramid, became the first successful smooth-sided pyramid, rising 345 feet into the desert sky. It was this model that his successors would perfect at Giza, the Great Pyramid of Khufu. At the heart of the Giza Plateau stands the greatest of them all, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, also known as Cheops. Built around 2560 BCE, it originally stood 481 feet tall, making it the tallest man-made structure in the world for nearly 3,800 years. Its base covers 13 acres, large enough to fit several modern city blocks. It consists of an estimated 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. If placed end to end, the stones could form a wall encircling the entire nation of France. Even more astonishing is its precision. The sides are aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal points of the compass. The base is nearly level too, within less than an inch. Such accuracy, achieved with copper tools and human labor, remains one of history's great engineering marvels. How were they built? The question of how the pyramids were built has fascinated scholars and dreamers alike for centuries. Ancient Greek historians claimed that massive machines and endless chains of slaves dragged the stones into place. Medieval legends suggested supernatural powers or even alien intervention. Today, archaeologists and engineers offer more grounded explanations. Most agree that vast ramps, either straight, zigzagging, or spiraling around the pyramid, were used to haul blocks upward. Sledges lubricated with water on sand reduced friction. Wooden rollers may have assisted in short distances. Recent discoveries near Giza of workers' villages revealed that the labor force was not composed of slaves, but skilled laborers. Farmers working during the Nile's flood season, and artisans dedicated to their king. They lived in organized barracks, received food and beer rations, and were buried with honor. Thus, the pyramids were not built by chains and whips, but by a workforce unified under a vision of divine kingship. The purpose of the pyramid: why devote such immense resources to building these colossal tombs? The answer lies in the Egyptian understanding of life and death. For the Egyptians, death was not the end. It was a transition. The soul, or Ka, needed a safe and eternal home. The pyramid, then, was more than a tomb. It was a machine of immortality designed to ensure the pharaoh's rebirth in the afterlife. The internal structure of Khufu's pyramid supports this view. Hidden passages lead to burial chambers and symbolic air shafts aligned with the stars. Some scholars believe these shafts were spiritual conduits, guiding the king's soul toward Orion, or the North Star, linking him with the eternal cycle of the heavens. At the base, temples and causeways connected the pyramid to the Nile, ensuring that funerary rituals were carried out with precision. The pyramid was thus both an earthly palace and a cosmic gateway. The pyramid complex of Giza, the Great Pyramid, did not stand alone. It was part of a grand necropolis. To the south rose the Pyramid of Kafir, slightly smaller, but appearing taller due to its higher elevation. At its base crouched the enigmatic Great Sphinx, a lion-bodied guardian with a human face, perhaps representing Kafir himself. Nearby stood the Pyramid of Menkaure, accompanied by smaller queens, pyramids, and mortuary temples. Together, these monuments formed a sacred landscape of power, religion, and eternity. Imagine approaching Giza in its prime. The pyramids were not the weathered, sandy structures we see today, but gleaming mountains of polished white limestone. In the sunlight, they would have shone like mirrors, dazzling travelers from miles away. At night, they rose like silhouettes against the stars, eternal beacons of divine kingship. Society behind the stone, the construction of the pyramids reveals much about Old Kingdom society. To command tens of thousands of workers, mobilize food supplies, and quarry millions of tons of stone required extraordinary organization. The central government coordinated everything: taxation, agriculture, transport, and labor. The Nile itself became the lifeline of the project, ferrying blocks from distant quarries. Farmers, when the fields lay submerged during the floods, turned into builders, their labor repaid with food, beer, and security. This unity of purpose bound the kingdom together. Building the pyramid was not just the pharaoh's ambition, it was a national endeavor. Myths and mysteries, despite centuries of study, the pyramids still hold mysteries. Were secret chambers yet to be discovered? What rituals were performed in their shadow? Why did pyramid building decline after the Old Kingdom? Some argue that the immense cost strained Egypt's resources. Others suggest political decentralization made such projects impossible. By the Middle Kingdom, pyramids were smaller, less precise, and often looted. The age of true pyramid building had passed, and yet their legacy endured. To the Greeks and Romans, the pyramids were wonders of the world. To medieval travelers, they were unfathomable relics. To us today, they are a reminder of what human ambition, united under a vision, can achieve. Archaeology and rediscovery. When Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, he brought with him scholars who studied the pyramids in detail, sparking Europe's fascination with Egyptology. Later excavations uncovered workers' villages, tools, and hieroglyphic inscriptions, shattering the myth of slave labor. Modern technology continues to probe their secrets. In recent years, Moan radiography using cosmic rays has revealed voids and chambers within Khufu's pyramid, hinting at hidden spaces still unexplored. Each discovery renews our wonder, reminding us that these monuments still guard mysteries after 4 millennia. Lessons of the pyramids. The pyramids of Giza stand not only as tombs for ancient kings, but as testaments to human creativity and determination. They embody the Egyptian belief that life extends beyond death, that kings could become gods, and that stone could preserve eternity. They also remind us of the delicate balance of civilization. For just as the pyramids rose, Egypt entered a golden age of prosperity. But when centralized power weakened, so too did the ability to construct such marvels. The pyramids are thus both triumphs and warnings, monuments to ambition, yet also monuments to fragility. As the sun sets over the desert, the pyramids cast long shadows across the sands. Millennia have passed. Empires have risen and fallen, yet still they stand. For travelers today, they evoke awe. For historians, they raise questions. For humanity, they are eternal. Chapter 3. Temples and Obelisks of the Nile. A kingdom in stone dawn on the Nile. The Nile flows slowly through Egypt, its waters glistening in the morning sun. Along its banks, palm trees sway gently, and fields of wheat and barley stretch outward. Rising above the landscape are monuments of a different scale, vast stone temples, towering obelisks, and sanctuaries carved into cliffs. If the pyramids were machines of immortality for kings, then the temples and obelisks of Egypt were machines of worship structures designed not for individuals, but for gods themselves. They were spaces where heaven and earth met, where rituals renewed the cosmos, and where pharaohs proved their divine legitimacy. The meaning of the temple. To understand Egypt's temples, one must understand Egyptian religion. The gods of Egypt were not distant deities, but living presences, forces of nature, protectors of order, guardians of the Nile's annual flood. The temple was their earthly home. Each temple was more than a place of prayer, was a cosmic model, a recreation of the universe. The floor symbolized the earth, the ceiling, the sky. Columns represented papyrus stalks or palm trees. Moving through a temple was like moving through creation itself, from chaos outside to sacred order within. At the very heart of every temple was the Holy of Holies, a dark hidden chamber where the statue of the god resided. Only the high priest or pharaoh could enter, bringing offerings of food, incense, and ritual words. Karnak, the temple of temples among the many temples of Egypt, none was greater than Karnak. Located in Thebes' modern Luxor, Karnak was dedicated to the god Amun-Ra, king of the gods. Construction began around 2000 BCE and continued for nearly 1,500 years. Each pharaoh sought to leave their marquetting pylons, courtyards, and sanctuaries until Karnak became the largest religious complex in the ancient world. Walking into Karnak was an overwhelming experience. Visitors first passed through massive pylons, triumphant gateways of stone, decorated with scenes of kings smiting enemies. Beyond lay vast courtyards filled with statues and obelisks. But the heart of Karnak was the great hypostyle hall. Imagine standing in a forest of stone. 134 colossal columns, some towering over 60 feet high, carved with hieroglyphs and painted in brilliant colors. Light filtered down through stone grills, illuminating the columns like shafts of divine sunlight. This was not simply architecture, it was theater, ritual, and cosmos united. Here, festivals like the Opet Festival took place, when the statue of Amun was carried in procession down the Nile to Luxor Temple, renewing the king's divine right to rule. Luxor Temple, the temple of kingship. Just a few miles away, connected by an avenue of sphinxes, stood the Luxor Temple. Unlike Karnak, dedicated to Amun as universal creator, Luxor focused on the divine aspect of kingship itself. It was here that pharaohs were ritually reborn, legitimized as sons of Amun. During the Opet Festival, when Amun's statue traveled from Karnak to Luxor, the fusion of god and king was celebrated in grand ceremony. In this way, Luxor Temple was not only a religious center, but also a political one. It ensured that the institution of kingship remained sacred and unchallenged, binding the nation under divine order. Abu symbol. Temples of the south far to the south, near the border of Nubia. Pharaoh Ramesses II left his mark with the temples of Abu symbol, carved directly into cliffs overlooking the Nile. The Great Temple of Abu symbol features 4 colossal statues of Ramesses seated on thrones, each over 65 feet tall. To approach them was to feel dwarfed by the sheer scale of royal ambition. Inside, the temple continues as a series of halls and sanctuaries, with scenes depicting Ramesses' military victories, most famously the Battle of Kadesh. But the most astonishing feature is its alignment. Twice a year at dawn, the rising sun illuminates the innermost sanctuary, shining directly on statues of the gods and Ramesses himself. It was as if the cosmos itself acknowledged his divinity. Obelisks. Pillars of the sun alongside temples. Egypt raised monuments of another kind of obelisks. Tall, slender monoliths carved from a single block of granite. Obelisks soared skyward, their tips capped with gleaming electrum to catch the sun's rays. They were dedicated to the sun god Ra, symbols of light and creation. Obelisks often stood at temple entrances, proclaiming the glory of the pharaoh who erected them. The inscriptions recorded victories, offerings, and dedications to the gods. One of the most prolific builders of obelisks was Hatshepsut, Egypt's female pharaoh. Her obelisk at Karnak rose nearly 100 feet, testament to both her reign and the engineering genius of Egyptian stoneworkers. Later centuries carried these monuments far from their homeland. Roman emperors transported obelisks to adorn their capital. Today, Egyptian obelisks stand in Paris, London, New York, and Rome, silent witnesses to a legacy spanning millennia. Daily life in the temples, though temples were built for gods, they were not silent sanctuaries. They were bustling centers of daily activity. Hundreds of priests performed rituals from dawn to dusk. The day began with the awakening of the gods, statue washed, anointed, and dressed in fresh linen. Offerings of bread, beer, meat, and incense filled the sanctuaries, ensuring the gods' favor. Beyond the sacred core, scribes recorded offerings, artisans carved reliefs, and musicians played for ceremonies. Temples also served as centers of learning, where astronomical observations and medical texts were preserved. For the common people, access to the inner sanctuaries was forbidden. Yet festivals opened the gates when statues of gods were carried in grand processions, accompanied by singing, dancing, and feasting. For ordinary Egyptians, these were moments when they felt closest to the divine. Engineering mastery, the construction of temples and obelisks, required astonishing engineering skill. Quarrying a single obelisk from granite quarries at Aswan meant cutting a block of stone weighing hundreds of tons without it cracking. Workers used dolerite pounders harder than granite to carve trenches, slowly freeing the monolith. If even one flaw appeared, years of work were lost. Transporting obelisks required barges, ramps, and thousands of workers. Raising them upright demanded ingenious methods of counterweights, sandpits, and levers. The temples themselves were feats of design. Massive pylons had to stand firm for millennia, columns balanced with perfect symmetry, and walls covered with detailed reliefs. And yet, many remain standing today, a testament to their builders' mastery. The symbolism of stone, why such obsession with permanence? The answer lies in Egyptian belief. Stone was eternal. To carve words in stone was to make them live forever. To build in stone was to anchor the divine order against chaos. Thus, temples and obelisks were not mere displays of power. They were acts of cosmic creation. Each stone placed was a renewal of order, each obelisk a ray of the sun fixed for eternity. The fall and rediscovery as centuries passed, Egypt's temples faced decline. Invasions, earthquakes, and religious shifts left many abandoned. With the rise of Christianity, temples were closed. Some were converted into churches, others dismantled for their stone. Yet their grandeur never vanished. Medieval travelers marveled at their scale. Renaissance scholars sketched their ruins. And in the modern era, archaeology brought them back into the light. The 1960s rescue of Abu Simbel, threatened by the rising waters of the Aswan High Dam, stands as one of archaeology's greatest achievements. The temples were cut into massive blocks and reassembled on higher ground, proving that humanity still valued the legacy of Egypt's sacred monuments. Lessons of the temples. The temples and obelisks of Egypt remind us of a civilization where religion, politics, and architecture were inseparable. They show how stone could embody belief, how ritual could sustain power, and how architecture could mirror the cosmos itself. Standing today in Karnak's hypostyle hall beneath its towering columns, one feels both the grandeur of human ambition and the humility of standing in a place meant for gods. As the day ends, the sun sets behind the Nile. The obelisks catch the last golden rays, glowing like eternal torches. The temples fall into shadow, but their stones still breathe with the prayers of millennia. For the Egyptians, these were not ruins. They were living spaces, bridges between the mortal and the divine. And though the gods of Egypt are no longer worshipped, their homes in stone remain silent, eternal, and filled with the echoes of a civilization that once believed itself immortal. Chapter 4. Greece. Harmony and perfection in marble. The birth of a new vision, the story of Greek. Architecture begins not with stone, but with wood and clay. Early Greek houses and temples were modest, fragile structures, temporary shelters for both mortals and gods. But as the Greek world expanded, so too did its ambition. By the 6th century BCE, the Greeks began to translate their wooden temples into marble and limestone, creating buildings that would define Western architecture for millennia. Unlike the colossal pyramids of Egypt, meant to endure as eternal tombs, the Greek temple was something different. A place where humans and gods could meet in beauty, proportion, and order. The Greeks were less concerned with eternity and more concerned with perfection. The idea of harmony, Greek philosophy taught that beauty lay in balance, symmetry, and mathematical proportion. Pythagoras, who explored the harmony of numbers in music, inspired architects to seek the same harmony in stone. For the Greeks, a temple was not merely a building, it was the cosmos in miniature, a reflection of order imposed upon chaos. Every column, every capital, every ratio was carefully calculated. The Greeks believed that to build beautifully was to honor the gods themselves. Thus, their temples were both acts of devotion and embodiments of philosophy. The orders of architecture central to Greek architecture were the order's distinct styles that governed the design of columns, capitals, and entablatures. Doric ordered the simplest and oldest, with sturdy columns and plain capitals. Strong, masculine, and austere, it was favored in mainland Greece. The Parthenon is its supreme example. Ionic order, more graceful, with slender columns and spiral volutes at the capital. Born in the Ionian cities of Asia Minor, it suggested elegance and femininity. Corinthian order, the most ornate, with capitals decorated with acanthus leaves. Adopted later, it became a favorite of the Romans, who spread it across their empire. These orders were not rigid but living systems, adapted to each site and purpose. They became the vocabulary of classical architecture, a language still spoken in courthouses, libraries, and government buildings today. The Parthenon, a temple for Athena. No discussion of Greek architecture can begin anywhere but the Parthenon, crowning the Acropolis of Athens. Built between 447 and 432 BCE, during the height of Athens' golden age. It was dedicated to Athena Parthenis, the city's patron goddess. Under the leadership of Pericles, architects Ectinus and Callicrates, guided by the sculptor Phidias, created a temple that embodied the ideals of Athens itself: democracy, beauty, and reason. From a distance, the Parthenon appears perfectly straight, symmetrical, and balanced. But this perfection is an illusion. Every line is subtly curved. The columns swell slightly in the middle. The steps arch upward. The corner columns lean inward. These refinements counteract optical illusions, creating a building that looks more perfect than perfection itself. Inside stood a colossal statue of Athena, 40 feet tall, made of gold and ivory. She was the guardian of the city, and the Parthenon her eternal home. Temples beyond Athens, though the Parthenon is the most famous Greek temples, were built across the Mediterranean. At Olympia stood the Temple of Zeus, housing a massive statue of the god crafted by Phidias, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In Paestum, southern Italy, the remains of Doric temples stand as reminders of Greek colonies. On the island of Delos, temples lined the sacred way to Apollo's sanctuary. Each temple was adapted to its site. Unlike Egyptian temples, which closed inward, Greek temples opened outward, designed to harmonize with the landscape. Set on hills, near seas, or in groves, they seemed part of nature itself. The agora and civic architecture. Temples were not the only architectural achievements of Greece. The agora, the public square, was the heart of civic life. Here, stoas long colonnaded halls provided shelter for markets, debates, and assemblies. Theaters, too, were masterpieces of design. Carved into hillsides, they could seat tens of thousands, their acoustics so perfect that a whisper on stage could be heard at the highest tiers. The theater of Epidaurus remains a marvel of both engineering and artistry. Thus, Greek architecture was not confined to worship, extended into every aspect of life, embodying the ideals of community, democracy, and beauty. Marble and labor Greek temples may seem timeless, but behind them lay immense human labor. Marble quarries at Mount Pentelicon supplied Athens with stone. Workers cut blocks with iron tools, transported them by sledges and carts, and raised them using cranes powered by pulleys and ropes. The precision required was staggering. Blocks were cut to fit so tightly that no mortar was needed. Some joints are so exact that even today a knife blade cannot slip between them. Sculptors, painters, and metalworkers added the final touches. Contrary to modern images of white marble, Greek temples were once vibrant with color columns painted, statues gilded, friezes alive with red and blue. What we see as bare stone was once a dazzling rainbow of artistry. The theater of the gods. To step into a Greek temple was to enter a sacred theater. The rituals, though hidden from the public, were carefully choreographed. Priests offered sacrifices at outdoor altars visible to all. Inside, the god statues stood in majesty, surrounded by offerings. Festivals transformed entire cities into spectacles. The Panathenaic festival in Athens saw processions of thousands, carrying robes woven for Athena, sacrifices, and music. The temple was the stage, and the city the audience. For the Greeks, architecture was not silent, Stone it was performance, harmony, and devotion. The influence of Greek architecture, the legacy of Greek architecture cannot be overstated. The Romans adopted it, adapting the Greek orders to their own imperial designs. During the Renaissance, architects revived its principles, seeing in it the embodiment of human reason. In the modern era, neoclassical architecture carries its memory into the centers of power from Washington's Capitol to London's British Museum. Why has it endured? Because Greek architecture speaks to something universal, the human desire for balance, harmony, and beauty. It captures not just the divine, but the ideal of humanity itself. Philosophy in stone, the Parthenon, the theaters, the Stowaways, these were not merely buildings. They were philosophy in stone. Just as Plato sought the ideal form, Greek architects sought the ideal proportion. Just as Aristotle examined the order of nature, they imposed order upon landscape. To walk among Greek ruins is to walk among ideas that shaped Western thought, politics, and art for over 2,000 years. Decline and survival. By the Hellenistic age, Greek architecture became more elaborate, more experimental. Temples grew larger, columns taller, ornament more intricate. But as Greece fell under Roman rule, many temples fell into neglect. Some were converted into churches, mosques, or fortresses. Others were dismantled for their stone, yet enough survived to inspire wonder. Travelers in the 18th century, encountering Greek ruins, brought sketches back to Europe, sparking neoclassicism. Today, millions still climb the Acropolis, stand before the Parthenon, and gaze in awe at a civilization that sought perfection in marble. As the sun sets over Athens, the Parthenon glows golden against the sky. Though weathered, though scarred by centuries, it still radiates harmony. Each column, each proportion, whispers of a people who believed that beauty was the path to the divine. The Greeks did not build for eternity as the Egyptians did. They built for perfection, for the fleeting moment when stone, proportion, and sunlight aligned to create harmony. And in that harmony, they believed, lay a glimpse of the gods. To stand before a Greek temple today is to be reminded that architecture can be more than shelter, more than monument. It can be an idea made stone, an idea so powerful that it continues to shape the way we build, think, and dream even now, 2.5 millennia later.